ก็สวัสดีนะครับคุณพ่อคุณแม่นะครับทุกท่านแล้วก็น้องๆเนาะนะครับวันนี้ก็รู้หรือยังวันนี้เรามาคุยเรื่องอะไรกัน รู้ยังวันนี้นะครับเราได้รับเกียรติจากทางคุณแอนดรูว์ Gillespie เนาะนะครับก็ท่านเป็น Vice Principal นะครับจาก The Brooks นะครับแล้วก็เป็นหนึ่งในเขาเรียกว่าเป็นหนึ่งในทีมที่ค่อนข้างจะมีความสำคัญเกี่ยวกับพวกวิชาที่มันเป็น Business Economics มากๆครับผมเพราะว่าเป็นคนเขียนตำรานะครับในบางบอร์ดเนาะนะครับที่เราเรียนกันอยู่ทุกวันนี้แหละครับผมพวก AQA Excel หรือว่าอะไรพวกนี้นะครับวันนี้นะครับก็หัวข้อที่เราจะคุยกันในวันนี้ก็คือจะเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของ how to improve นะครับ your result in IGCSE เนาะในวิชาของ business แล้วก็ economics นะครับโอเคนะครับเพื่อเป็นการไม่เสียเวลาเนาะวันนี้ก็ได้รับเกียรติจากคุณแอนดรูว์นะครับ please welcome โอเคแอนดรูว์
Thank you thank you for coming along today. So we're going to talk economics in this session, and then there's a session later about business, if that's of interest to you. Can we just introduce ourselves? So my name's Andrew Gillespie. Andrew. Pan.
My name's Wal.
Okay, and then, right. So we're just going to work together a bit today and share some ideas, I hope. As probably introduced, so I'm Vice Principal at Dover Brooks in Oxford. And academic director, so oversee the studies there. And I've been a teacher for many years and also got involved in examining. So today we're going to really talk about the exams and how to approach exams. I started examining, I think, in 1992, a long time ago. And then since then I've done lots of different jobs to do with examining, a different aspect. So when you sit your exam paper, that paper was people started thinking about that probably 2 years before, and it goes through lots of different stages and lots of committees and lots of different people checking to make sure that when you sit that exam, it's right and there are no mistakes, because that would be very bad, and that the paper is going to work well. So many people are involved in writing it, checking it, trying it out, and there's different jobs involved. So some of the jobs I now do, so I've done many jobs in examining, but some of the ones I now do. So I'm a chief examiner. That means that you oversee the papers, make sure they're okay and they work, and then you oversee the marking of them and that they're marked correctly and that they work in the way that you'd expected. And then all the scripts come back in, and then you decide on where the grades are. So what mark do you need for a 9 or an A, and you have to decide on the right mark. So you have these committees called an awarding committee. So the chief examiner gets the papers produced, makes sure they work, and helps decide on these boundaries. The chair of examiners, so I do that for GCSE and A level, the chair of examiners is responsible for the overall quality to make sure that the standards are the same each year. So that if you get a 9, you will get a 9. Whoever got a 9 this year would get a 9 last year and in the future. So just make sure that we don't have variation. So it's a quality role. And then that's all to do with business. On the economics front, I've developed an A-level syllabus and produced that. And one role is a reviser and a scrutineer, and that's just checking papers and trying them out and making sure they work. Anyway, the main point of that is lots of experience of how things work. And today, we can't cover the whole of GCSE economics in an hour. But what we can do is just think about principles and how to approach things and how to try and kind of maximize our performance. Is that okay? So you've still got to do all the work and you've still got to go in and learn it all and all those sorts of things. But today we can just think about how we use our knowledge and so on. Okay? So I need you to think, because you probably know lots already. I'm sure you know lots already. Sorry, that's just to show some of the things. I've written lots and lots of books, economics books, business books, A-level, GCSE, undergraduate, many things. So it's just again to reassure you that some experience in terms of what I'm about to tell you. So we'll begin with economics, and I just want you to think for a minute, because you've probably talked about this lots in your lessons. If someone said to you, what do I need to do to succeed in my exam? What would you say? Okay? So just have a think for a second. If the question is, what advice? So here I'm coming along and I'm saying, please tell me, what do I need to know to do well in my exams? Because I've worked for 2 years really hard and I want to maximize my performance. Okay, I'm going to try and write something up. Let's see. What would anybody say? What advice would you give somebody? You're going to have to join in because otherwise it's going to be very quiet. Then have you got any advice? Study hard. Okay, so we've got to study hard. Yeah. You will see my very bad writing here. Study hard. There's some good advice. Have you got any advice? Yeah. Past paper questions. Good. Great. Past paper questions, yeah? We need some more. We need to fill the piece of paper. So, any ideas? What have your teachers told you? Go through textbooks? Very good. Use the textbooks.
Revisit the classwork.
Revisit the class. Oh, yeah. Going revisit classwork. Yeah. Very good. See if we can get three more. Three more things. So we got. Yeah.
Maybe like understanding the concepts, how they use and the disadvantages.
Understand the concepts. So, and also, did you say disadvantages?
Like when you use it and
Yeah. Yeah. Two more. Two more. We're nearly there. You've done really well. Two more. More advice. One more. No more? No more? Okay, let's just have a think about these. That obviously is important, and we can't do that in an hour, okay? So, but what we're thinking about today is how do I use what I have learned most effectively? As an examiner, when you look at answers, you often see students who know a lot, but they're not using that in the right way to answer the question. So they don't get that many marks, they only get that many marks. And how you use what you know is as important as what you know in the first place. So you can walk into an exam and you have studied hard and you've actually know lots and lots and lots of things, but the way that you use it can sometimes be disappointing. And that's why you walk out and you get a 5 and you think, but I worked for a 9. And you should have got a 9. You have to use it in a certain way. So that we're going to look at, when we can't study hard today, but we can look at what to do when I have studied hard. That's what we're going to do. This is important. So did you come up with that one? Yeah? Okay, so that is important. When we set papers, what we're trying to do is make the structure understandable to students so that you don't get surprises. If you're used to 9-mark questions, you get 9-mark questions. If you're used to 16, whatever they are, you're used to that because that's the way we set up the exam in the first place. So there shouldn't be surprises in terms of structure. But we don't want the questions to be totally predictable. Does that make sense? So we don't want an exam where you walk in and you go, I've seen that one, I've seen that one, I've seen that one, I've seen that one, because that's not testing very much then. So you can, and I'm going to advise you in a minute, we're going to look at past paper questions. It's really important to use past paper questions because you will learn about the style of the paper, the style of the questions, how the examiners mark it, but obviously don't rely on these for the questions that you're going to get. Now I know that's obvious, but all I mean is we can't set the same paper time after time after time after time in terms of the content. What we can do is make sure that the way it's written is familiar, but we should really be testing different concepts. And therefore, this is good practice. It's really important to get used to the way that questions are asked and the type of question. So, for example, you might get used here to supply and demand questions, but the past paper might be moving demand that way. And the one you get is about moving supply this way. You're going to have to use it in a different way. So you don't memorize and just repeat this. But this is very, very important. This one, okay, yeah, textbooks. I've obviously written textbooks. I'd love you to buy textbooks. Important. A couple of things to check. If you're not sure what you should be learning, where will you find that? What do I actually need to know for my GCSE economics? Where will I find that information? Any idea? Okay, we're going to, yeah? Syllabus, yeah. So nowadays we tend to call them a specification. But that, the syllabus or the specification, that is what you need to know what you have to actually learn. The textbook should cover that, but you need to be careful because if it depends on the exam. What exam board? Do you know what exam board you're doing? Cambridge. I guessed wrongly. I'm going to talk about Pearson in a minute, but anyway, that's fine. Cambridge. Don't know. Okay, I should have prepared Cambridge, but we're going to talk about it. It doesn't matter. We'll get the principles of the same. But the point is, Cambridge will be similar to Pearson, but may not be exactly the same. Some of the topics may be different. Okay, and therefore the textbook may be a general one that's for that board more than that board. So you just, if you're not sure what the topics are, because if I'm a chief examiner saying, show me the paper you've written, I have the paper and I have the syllabus, and I've got to make sure that anything there is there. Because if we set a question here that isn't listed in the syllabus, you're going to be cross, your teachers are going to be cross, and I'm going to get a lot of phone calls. So we need to match that up. So it's not very user-friendly often, but the syllabus is one of the documents you need, or we call it the specification. And be slightly careful, even if it is a CIE textbook. I think I've written a CIE textbook. Even if it's a CIE textbook, just make sure that you've got this still, because sometimes it still doesn't quite match, or sometimes it gives that much space and really it should give them that much space. So use your book, but use this as well. Do you use anything else? Do you use anything apart from a textbook? So any other resources you use? No, something like that, no? Okay, so for example, I mean, there's obviously lots of websites, and you don't use any website material or anything like that? No, okay. Well, I mean, there's quite a famous one in the UK, which is called Tutor to You, and that's a very good website for business and economics. It isn't specific CIE, it's got lots of brilliant resources, but you just need to make sure it's got the resources on the topics that you need there. I'd certainly, if you haven't looked at that, it's certainly worth a look in terms of videos, memory things, tests, notes, and so on and so on. I'm sure there are other ones as well, but that's quite a good one. Revisit classwork, that's good. So who put that? Who put revisit classwork? Yeah, what did you mean by that? That's right.
Teacher gives in each slide for each day.
Yeah.
Like maybe you should go back through them to help with the revision.
Yeah, and obviously, if you can do that throughout, rather than just when it gets to revision. So if you set aside a bit of time each week to revisit, I'm sure you do, then you're building it in all the way. And again, I'm sure you do this, but you just want to make sure that you're not just revising the week before, that you go back. Because what you don't want to do is to suddenly have to learn everything in a few weeks from 2 years. You want to, make sure that you're covering earlier material as you go. And either the teacher sets you tests on earlier materials, or you set yourself tests on earlier materials, so that you keep revisiting and get that recall going, rather than you suddenly go, okay, I have an exam in a month's time, I've got to learn everything. You should have a lot of it being familiar. Okay, and then tell me about this one. What do you mean by that?
So like for some question, we need to compare different methods and different ideas and which one should be used.
Yeah.
So we need to know the advantage.
Yeah, you need to know the advantage. And you use this word concepts. In economics, if you look at what examiners say, they're often saying use of economic concepts. And it's just looking for the opportunity to talk about opportunity cost, or to talk about supply and demand, or the price mechanism, or to talk about market failures, and to start to use that language of economics so that you are an economist, not someone who understands economics and common sense. So that often the way you use language and terms and the way you put that into your arguments is really often distinguishing between the very top grades and the kind of middle grades. That's great. So that's brilliant. Well done. Now, if someone said, okay, that's good, but what about for economics specifically? So is there anything you would advise me? So that's about preparing for exams, which is what I asked you. Imagine the question was, I want to do really well in my GCSE. So that's still true. All of that is still true. But is there anything else that you would add or say? You know, you've probably done lots of past papers and things. Is there anything else you would say for that question? Yeah? So topic, and that's probably a bit like this, isn't it? And that's probably true for every subject, but you're right, you need the syllabus and to go through the topics, that's true. Anything else specific for economics, do you think? No? Okay, that's fine. Well, let's see. Okay, well, let's talk a bit more, and then let's see when we come back whether there's a bit more we can add in about economics. So I'm just going to talk you through some of the things I think. I'm sure you'll know it all already, but let's just go through the clicker. Whatever, you know, I'm going to say exactly the same in the next session. Whatever you're doing to prepare for exams, remember that you have a customer. You study business. Business is all about the customer needs and wants. You have a customer. Who's your customer? Who's your customer? You're going to be doing exams. Who's your customer? Anyone? Any ideas? Yeah. Who? Sorry? The examiner. So you're not, I mean, in one sense, you should be doing this for yourself and to broaden your knowledge and to make the world a better place. I hope you do. You should be expanding your mind and horizons. I hope you do. You should be enjoying studying economics because it's great to study. I hope you do. But when it comes back to just the exam itself, if what you're trying to do is maximize your grade, then you've got to think who is going to mark this and what do they want. And it doesn't matter really what you want, and it doesn't matter really what your teacher wants. What matters is, what does your customer want? And so when we set exams, we say, those are the questions, and that's what we want. And what you've got to just make sure is you really, really understand what your customer's asking for, and whether you like it or not, you do it in that way. Maybe actually you've got a better, more interesting way. Maybe, fine. But purely in terms of the exam, what do they want? And part of what we've got to do is get inside the mind of our customer and really know them very well, as you would in business. So what does that mean? Absolute key documents, I would say, are specification or syllabus. So we mentioned that there. Is this going to be in the exam or not? Is in the syllabus or specification. If it's not there, write a letter of complaint, because they shouldn't be setting questions that are not there. It's got to be there, okay? And these are written in slightly different ways, but people like CIE, it's very clear, this is what we're going to talk about. That's just, and also the language. Because the way I teach you, I might explain something using certain words. The textbook might use certain words. What you want to make sure you're clear about is what are the words in the specification. I'm making this up, but you know, I talk about the price mechanism. They may talk about the price system. I talk about, I don't know, price skimming, and they call it something else. So you've just got to make sure the language you've got. In business, there's this word called functions of business. And we find time after time, people don't know what the word function means. If they knew what the word meant, they could write brilliantly. It's a language terminology. So we're going to do that. It isn't written necessarily for students. So it's not necessarily very user-friendly. I would expect you to have your highlighter and to be going through that literally line by line by line as you cover it during class or during the term, and certainly anywhere near revision. I am sure I have covered this. Now, what it doesn't tell you is that word really important? Is it a massive topic or is it a small topic? That's where your teacher and the book can help. You know, do I spend 10 hours on that or half an hour? But it tells you the topics, areas that you're going to need. This one, so it's interesting. We mentioned past papers, and I've put agree, and I've put mark schemes. Why have I put mark schemes? What's the mark scheme going to tell you, obviously? What's the mark scheme? Yeah, go on. Yeah. What are the rules that the examiners have used to award marks? We're marking, you know, I don't know, we oversee exams of 30,000, 50,000 students. How do we get those marked in the same way to be consistent? We've developed a marking approach. And this is what the markers have to do. So you need to understand what are the rules that they use, which may not be the rule. You may not think they make sense. You may think, oh, that's horrible, but it doesn't matter. Customers define the rules. And so there's no point looking at a past paper unless you've got the mark scheme. There's no point you trying to work out how you think it should be answered, how you think marks should be given, because it's not down to you, it's down to the examiner. So past paper plus mark scheme, and you read that and you go, oh, that's interesting. And what matters in the mark scheme is not often the bullet points. The bullet points are things that students might think of, things that students might say. Doesn't mean you've got to say them all, doesn't mean you've got to say them in that order. It's helping markers to say, this is the sort of thing you might find. What matters in the mark scheme is not the bullet point saying they might say this, this, this. What matters is, what is it that moves me from level 1 to level 2? How do I go from level 2, 5 marks, to level 3, 7 marks? That instruction is normally about a certain skill that you need to demonstrate. So when you look at the mark schemes, people tend to look at the facts. Oh, an answer might include boom, 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 boom. Okay, that's interesting. Key bit, but what gets me 1 mark? What do I have to do to get 2 marks or 3 marks? So it's not just the content. We call it indicative content. And people get a little bit, I mean, it's important, but people get a little bit kind of think about, well, I've got that, and that, so I must have 10 marks. Well, no, because you didn't do it in the right way. You didn't follow the rules to go level 1, level 2, level 3. So does that make any sense? We're going to look at them in a minute. So yes, past papers, we get an understanding of structure and style. Yes, mark scheme, to see what do they actually mean by that. And then this one. Has anyone looked at examiner reports? No? No? Never looked at an examiner report? Never looked at an examiner report?
I looked at some other subjects.
Yeah. Good. They're not written for you, if I'm honest. But at the end of each exam, we have to write a report saying, and this is what happened. This worked well, this one did, students did this brilliantly, students might want to think about this. They're kind of more directed at the teachers and the censors in terms of things to think about. And then we often do training sessions for schools and training sessions for teachers based on this. But there's no reason, they're public. There's no reason why you can't read them. And what they are people like me saying, okay, we set this question and this is what happened. And actually what we noticed was students are brilliant. Students are really good at this, but I'm not so sure about this. Okay, and that again will give you an insight into what works well and what examiners like and what they feel is not being seen enough. And over time, that might guide, because it's telling you this is what we want to see and we're not seeing it. So you might think, okay, maybe am I strong in that area or not? And it's not just knowledge. Don't go, oh, I love economics, but I'm not very good at that topic. It's not just about knowledge. You can get knowledge. What you've got to think about is, what skill do you want to develop? What is it that you're trying to get better at skill-wise? If you've got a knowledge gap, you've forgotten what is a monopoly. I can only remember 2 advantages, not 27. Okay, you can probably go and learn that. But what the real thing is, can I analyse or can I evaluate? That's a skill, and that needs some kind of thinking. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Is that all right so far? Is this making any sense? So, our pack of life, I've got some past papers. Not assuming future questions are the same, but I've got some past papers. I've got my mark scheme, so I look at a question, I look at the mark scheme, look at the question, look at the mark scheme. And having worked through it, I just read what the examiner said about it to get a feel for how I would have done and how people actually did on the day. Okay, and those are my, I think, key things. And you've got most of them there. So apologies, I thought most of you are going to be Pearson, but it doesn't matter. The principles are the same, so don't worry about the detail. But this is e.g. your syllabus. You're going to go and look at that. And this is e.g. some of the things that you will find inside. And you're going to read that with your highlighter. Your teacher's done it. You're doing it to get yourself internalised. Because let's take this one. This may not be the same. That's the point. It may not be the same for you. But for Pearson, calculate price elasticity using percentage changes in quantity demanded and percentage changes in price. So in that exam board, they will give you the percentage changes, and all you have to do is put them together to calculate price elasticity demand. Now, I don't know, you will know. For CIE, is it the same, or do you have to calculate the percentage change? Do you happen to know? You don't know. And that's fine, I don't, but that's the point. In that syllabus, it's going to tell you what you need to do and what you don't need to do. If I'm preparing for that board, I don't need to have to do questions where I'm working out percentages. I've just got to work out how to use them. It might be in CIE, you've got to do it slightly differently. Okay, so reading this here, and you'll go, for example, this is good actually, it's quite clear. CIE it may be the same, I don't know, but the factors influencing price elastic demand, here are the 4 things that you want to know about. Degree of necessity, that's not a phrase I would use in my teaching. I might say, is it a necessary good? But I wouldn't necessarily say degree of necessity. But if it's there, that's how it might be written in a question. And you don't want to go, you don't want to walk out the exam room and say to your teacher, oh, I've never studied that. And they go, yes, you have. Is it a necessary good? And you go, oh, yeah. So that's your checklist. Same for, so you can go on, obviously go on CIE, you pull off the syllabus and you work through it with the detail. And you understand this stuff. So one of the things I've sort of mentioned, but we didn't mention here, is skills. Or examiners like to call them assessment objectives, AOs. They are incredibly important in the world of examining. Your customer is always thinking and talking about AOs, AOs, AOs. And when these qualifications are designed, we get permission to write papers, but there are certain rules, and those rules focus on content, but AOs, and what we do with these things. We have to hit certain targets in each paper in order to keep accredited. Okay. And so these are AOs. So do those words mean anything to us? Does that mean anything? Does that mean anything to you or not mean? Yeah? Tell me what you know or don't know about them. Yeah, well, yeah, you can go. Anyone can join in, yeah? They are using exam questions. Yeah, go on. Yeah. Anyone else? Do they mean anything to you? They don't have to, but no. Okay. So when we set a question, we have to then say what AOs are being assessed. What is this question trying to do? Okay. I talk about the demands of the question. What are the demands of this question? What are you expecting students to do to get these marks? Not what knowledge, but what are they going to do with that knowledge? If it was AO1, look, what's the next one? Yeah. If it was just saying, please tell me what we mean by an externality, that is just knowledge. A lot of multiple choice questions are kind of, what does this mean? Knowledge. That's the lowest level of skill. And far too many students spend their time thinking about knowledge when they really want to spend their time thinking about this stuff. Okay? You've got to practice skills, not just knowing things. Don't just revise with word. Practice skills. Right. This word, so you might have called it something different. What is this skill? So this is called AO1, this is AO2, application. Have you heard the word application, or what does that mean?
I think context in the question.
Context, yeah. So you might have called it context. And what does that mean?
For example, the question might be talking about a specific type of business or a specific situation, so you use that information in the answer.
Yeah. So we might ask you, I was doing something this morning about sugar tax on Coca-Cola type products, putting a tax because it's very sugary. Your answer has to relate back to that product or that type of product, because otherwise you're not using the context. CIE, I'm sure, is the same, where you've got kind of case studies and items like that. Remember, that spent 2 years with people looking at those words saying, why is that sentence in there? Get rid of that sentence. Do we use that or not? If we don't use it, get rid of it. So if it's there, that's been looked at by a lot of people who've decided there is something useful in those words or diagrams or charts. If you then go, oh, I don't care about that, this is what my textbook says, you're not going to put it in context. So one of the problems of textbooks is they can't provide the context that you're facing in the exam. One of the real challenges in the exam is, what's the context doing? And you are often so desperate, and I get it, you're nervous, you've done lots of this, you've studied hard, your brain is full of facts and definitions and all that sort of stuff, and you get a question and bang, off you go. And you're missing this thing. This is the item. And the minute you start going to that and bringing that in, grades just jump. Because, I mean, when I said before, it is amazing. Year after year, and it's sad, year after year you go, you know a lot of economics, but you haven't used the item, and that's keeping you way down the bottom. And the minute you start saying, right, you know, a tax is a charge placed on the producer. In this case, we're going to put a tax on sugar. This is because it's unhealthy. I'm now, my argument is to do with the case, and suddenly I'm way up there. No reference to the case, and I can't go anywhere. So, yes, study hard. Yes, use your book. But that is not going to be the answer. If all you, not all, it sounds terrible, but if all you can do is repeat the textbook, you're not going to get those top grades, because the textbook can't cover this bit. And this bit is going to be important here and here. So, context. Read your answer and think, could this be in a textbook? If it could be in a textbook, it hasn't got any application in it. Okay? Analysis. Analysis is probably more straightforward. What do we mean by analysis? Do you know that word or not know that word? Do you know? You must know what analysis is. No? No? Okay. That's building an argument. So again, depends. Some exam boards talk about chains of reasoning or logical, coherent arguments. If you build an argument, that's analysis. So, I don't know. If incoming, tell me what's going to happen to demand if income increases. Go on. Yeah. Okay, so income increases. Let's assume it's a normal good. People have more purchasing power, therefore demand increases, therefore demand shifts to the right, therefore here's my diagram. That's a chain of reasoning, okay? And often analysis, if I was looking for analysis, if I was trying to say to an examiner, here is analysis, you know, if I'm using words like therefore, or as a result, or consequently, these are useful phrases, because this is saying, and therefore this, as a result this, consequently this, and it's showing this goes to this, goes to this, goes to this. Okay? So chains of reasoning are this skill, and they can be, if you're writing, they're demonstrated by words like that, often phrases like that show bump to bump to bump. Okay? If I said incomes increase, purchasing power goes up, demand for normal products goes up, demand curve shifts to the right, diagram, I've done quite a lot of that. What I haven't done is provided any application, because what I've just told you could be in a textbook. What I've just told you is good knowledge, good analysis, but at the moment there's no application, because I'm not talking about demand for chairs or cars or whatever it is in the item, I'm just talking about demand. And therefore the examiner will go, knowledge good, analysis good, context, limits your mark. Depending on the question, but they limit your mark. And this one, what's this one's a nightmare. What's this one? Evaluation. There's different words, you might have called it something else. Anyone? Yeah? Yeah. Advantages, disadvantages is good. Yeah. Plus, minus, good. Anything else? Evaluation? Any other? Should we introduce a sugar tax? What would you have to do to answer that type of question? What are you going to do? What have you just told me you're going to do? Should we introduce a sugar tax on fizzy drinks? You're going to say, yeah, go on. Okay, so you're going to say it should, it shouldn't. But should we? You've told me maybe yes, maybe no, but should we? What might you want? What's missing maybe? Conclusion. And it's tough. Conclusions are tough because you've got to make a decision. And if you're anything like me, you don't like that. I quite like going, well, it could be this or it could be that. But actually deciding which one is bigger than the other is tough. So conclusion, or sometimes we call it judgment, is a really tough skill. And evaluation is looking for that ability to go, well, you could do that and you could do that. That's the one I'm going to do because. So overall, a sugar tax is or isn't a good idea because, and you've got to start pulling it together. That's tough. And if I'm thinking, I've just got to get on with my economics, I'm just going to go and work really hard, it's actually a lot easier to spend hours and hours learning words, and you walk out and go, Mum and Dad, I've been working so hard. And you have, but you've been working really hard at this stuff. And what we need for the higher grades is to work at practicing this stuff, because if all you've got is, you could learn a textbook, you could walk into GCSE economics, you won't get the top grades because you're not developing, I mean, you might get some analysis, but you're not developing these sorts of skills, okay? And so we're going to look at that in a minute, which is what do I do with my knowledge and getting comfortable with these words. So this bit will be quick because this isn't, this is unfortunately this is Pearson, but it's the same thing. In CIE, in the syllabus document, it will tell you what they think these things are. And it should be the same because all the exam boards agree. But basically, AO1 is, I know things, knowledge. AO2 is, I use concept theories in context. So you talked about concepts, correct, in specific contexts. And if we've drawn a diagram or a pie chart or a text item, we spent a long time doing that. We really want you to use it, and that's AO2. And if you don't do that, there's going to be a problem in terms of marks. AO3, select, organise, interpret information, and analyse issues. That's analysis, using diagrams to move things. AO4, evaluate to make judgments and conclusions. So be careful of just, CIE might be slightly different, but be careful of just for and against. I still kind of want to know, so what's the answer then? I know there's a case for, I know there's against, but is the one argument stronger than another? And really, really good evaluation starts to pull that together. And then we don't need to go through this, but you will see here kind of the proportion of marks that are for the different skills. So, you know, on this particular exam board, but it'll be same for the CIE, you know, 24% on that paper, 48% are for application. So you can see immediately, if I don't apply well, there's this huge gap that I'm missing. You know, most of the marks here, so knowledge on this one is only 15%. So if all your revision is knowledge, you're focusing in on quite a small percentage of the total marks. Yeah. Here, we're hitting the really big marks here, and then evaluation at the top end. And the evaluation is normally whether you really are, you know, the 8s, the 9s, or the A's, the A stars. That's going to make the real difference at that top end. But you've got to get this bit right in terms of that. Now, check the CIE. It might be a slightly different distribution, but I suspect it's very, very similar. Okay? So, what are we trying to say? We need to understand AOs. We need to be working with our teachers and things on the AOs and thinking about how we're demonstrating them. And we need to put our effort into the right, you know, allocate our revision or preparation time into the right areas. So it might be, e.g., you go and revisit stuff you've already written, and you start saying, okay, how would I do that? If I focused a bit more on AO2, how might I change my answer to that question? How do I, rather than just practicing knowledge, how do I revisit that and try and develop that skill? So that's the same thing. Those AOs. You move up to A level, you're going to love GCSE economics, you're going to move on to A level economics, exactly the same thing. The difference at A level is this is a bit lower here and it's a bit higher here. So A level, you have to make more judgments because that's an even higher level skill. So a lot of the content's the same at A-level, but what you're doing with it is slightly different and is a bit more on the judgment side. Okay, so you find that, and I'll find it for CI and send it out, but that's important. And now again, I apologise because I thought we were Pearson, but it's the same principles. Somewhere you either know because your teacher's told you, but go to the specification document. Exam boards are trying to be transparent. You know, this is what we want you to do. It's up to you to then do it, but this is what we want you to do. So the command words are usually defined pretty clearly. If you get that word, that's the AO we want. You get that word, that's the AO. So, for example, here, what is meant by is a knowledge type question. Do you know what this stuff is? That's a knowledge. And they just want you to tell us what it means. If it's a analyze, if the command word is analyze something, then clearly you've got to analyze. And therefore that's going AO1, AO2, AO3. If the question asks you to evaluate, it's AO1, AO2, AO3, and AO4. You've got to get to this bit to get to your top marks. Does that sound familiar? What command words are you used to? What words? What are the beginning words you're used to? What words do you get at the beginning of questions? Go on, you must have done lots of questions in the past, haven't you? Anyone? Can you remember exactly what sort of homework questions do you get? What do they ask you to do? Yeah.
Define the term.
Okay, good. So what's that?
So answer the question about what the specific word.
Yeah, good. And what AO would that be? Yeah, knowledge. That's fine. You need knowledge. You need knowledge to answer questions. So you've got to have the knowledge. But that's probably a kind of 2-mark, 3-mark question, depending on the board. It's a knowledge base. Go on, give me another question. There must be more. What's a more difficult one than that? Discuss. So what does that mean? They haven't got it in there one, but go on, you have discuss. Go on. So can you give me an example of a discuss question? Can you think of one?
Government should increase interest rates.
Okay, discuss. Well, okay, let's try that one. That's good. Let's discuss whether the government, you can see my terrible writing, should increase interest rates. Is that right? Okay, that's a great question. And for CIE, how many marks would that be? What sort of marks? 8. Okay, so and is that quite a high? It's not a question mark. Is that quite a high tariff? Is that one of the highest marks? Yeah. Okay. So what do I need to do for that one?
Increase. The government should increase interest rates because it would.
Okay, it's good. You're doing well, don't worry. So,
It would encourage saving.
okay, good. So what? I mean, it's right. I'm not being funny, but if we're trying to do a bit of this, we need to go and therefore or consequently. So if your brain or your teacher's brain is going, so what? Then we haven't analysed enough. We've just made a point. I know you could. I'm just saying, but if that's all you wrote, higher interest rates, more saving, you want to go, so what? I don't, what's the point of that? And I want to take it forward a bit, and therefore I want to analyse. So what's that encourages saving? What does that mean? What might the effect on the economy be? Good. Good. Yeah. What are we beginning to do now with these arrows? What skill are we beginning to show? Because we're developing, we're going, this leads to this, leads to this. So what are we showing? AO analysis? AO. Okay, we're doing AO3 at this stage. We're analysing, we're saying this is going to happen. So we've got more saving, we've got less spending, So what? Why might that be useful or not useful? Okay, what about, have you got an argument against? So an argument why you wouldn't want to increase interest rates? Do you know about interest rates or not? You haven't done interest rates. Do you know about interest rates? You don't know? Oh, okay, no wonder we're quite, okay. Can you tell us what an interest rate is?
It's like
Yeah. Good. Okay, so that's interesting because what you've just shown is if you don't have the knowledge, you can't access the question. So you do need knowledge to get into the question, but this question then needs you to do higher level skills. So for those who haven't done it, an interest rate is the cost of borrowing money. If you go to a bank, you borrow $100, whatever it is, you've got to pay interest on it. You have to pay extra money on it. And if the interest rate is high, then people might say, well, I'll save my money. I won't take money out of the bank. I'll leave it in the bank and get extra benefits. So high interest rates encourage saving, people spend less, and that reduces demand in the economy. And there are certain times when the government's trying to get demand down. They're a bit worried that we're all spending too much. And so they can use interest rates, or the banks can use interest rates to do that. And the main point is, don't worry if you haven't studied it, the main point is we're beginning to have a chain of arguments, and that's some analysis. And if we did it on the other side, imagine that it's more expensive to borrow money, and I've borrowed money for my house. UK, a lot of people borrow money for houses. The interest rate goes up and they've got to repay all of this money. And that can cause problems in terms of payments and living costs and things. So there's an argument against, which would be more analysis. So what we're doing here is we're saying, discuss whether you should increase interest rates. To answer that question, I need to know what an interest rate is, AO1. I need to have arguments, AO3. And because it's a discuss question, I really want some form of judgment, which is overall, is this a good thing or not? Does that make sense? And that is where you would get your AO4 from. What would be different if I put that or that? What's different about the question if I put that, for example, or if I put that? So I think I could probably answer that question. I don't think I can answer that question. Genuinely, why not? I can still do that, but I can't really do this well if it's got that word in there. Why is that? Why can't I? You might be able to, but I can't. Why can't I answer that question? Anybody? I don't know enough about the Thai economy or the Thai government. I haven't got a clue. I know I should do, so I apologise, but I don't. So I could put a general argument, but I don't know that context. Now, luckily in the exam, there'll be a passage all about the Thai government or Thai economy, and I will pull it from there. But at the moment, if you gave me that question, I'd say to you, I can have a go at some of it, but I'm not going to get 8 out of 8. I can probably do that one, UK government. Maybe you can or maybe you can't, because I know a little bit more about that context. But the minute I've got that is a different question, because it's not saying, should a government do this? It's saying, should the UK government? And therefore, you've got to bring in the context of the UK. Now, the UK at the moment has got very high interest rates. It's already done a lot of this. And part of my judgment would be, blimey, you've already got high, you sure you want to keep doing this? Because we've got the context clear. Now, the context for you will always be in the eye. They're not expecting you to bring in context. You don't expect you to bring in a knowledge of the Thai economy or the British economy. It'll be in the item. But the minute you get that sort of word, it changes that question. If you haven't got that word, then it hasn't really got AO2 in it. It's just got the other stuff. And if they put that word in, does that make any sort of sense? So revision practice is to look at questions like that. When you look at the mark scheme, see what it's the grid on the mark scheme that tells you what you need for the different levels, and to keep practicing on those skills, not just the knowledge stuff. So again, this is. So I just trawled some examiner reports. You could do exactly the same, and you'll find the same messages time after time after time. And they're your things to remember. So when I was looking at, tell me about GCSE economics, what do students need to think about? You're going to be doing a lot of calculations. What sort of things are you going to calculate? What sort of calculations have you done? What, have you done any number calculations? None at all. Have you calculated anything? Yeah. Price elasticity, yeah. So you might have done price elasticity of demand. Have you done any other ones? Have you done any calculations? No?
Same.
Same? What about price elasticity of supply? Did you do that one? Do you do price elasticity of supply? No? Do you do income elasticity of demand? No? Do you do costs? Have you done costs and profits? So in there, it's economics. There'll be some calculations, questions, okay? Now, again, it depends on your specific instructions, but there are usually instructions on how many decimal places. So one of the things about calculation questions is people lose simple marks. They put units when they mean percentages. They put dollars when they mean units. They put 37 decimal places when we might need 2, depending on the question. They put, so simple, they don't put their workings. Our aim in examining is to reward what we can. If there's workings there, even if the answer's wrong, we're looking to reward the working. So don't put your workings hidden away all over the place. Put the workings down, and you may get it wrong, but if the process is good, you'll be picking up marks. So calculations are people drop simple marks when you know they don't need to. So make sure you know PED, for example, is not a percentage. It's not in bar. It's what is it? It's a number, and you want to put that. This is very common. And that's true again for all exam boards. People not getting the right, spending too long on the wrong things. So sometimes they're not using the higher skills. Sometimes they're using the higher skills when they don't need to. If a question says analyze, it means that. It doesn't mean you don't need 2 sides. You don't need a judgment. And if you're doing this, this is wasting time when you should be getting on to the next question. So time, you can usually get the marks quicker than you think if it's a focused answer. And spending a bit of time thinking about the question, planning it a bit. I know it's scary because everyone wants to rush and write, but planning it a bit so that you show the skill required quickly, you'll accumulate marks much faster. Yeah? We tell the story many times about a student who used to just kind of rock backwards and forwards in the exam. We thought, what's he doing? He's just rocking on his chair. He shouldn't be, you know, stop that. What he was doing was thinking. And he would always start writing later than everybody else. And everyone thought, oh, he doesn't know what's going on. He's lost the plot. He got the top grade because he was planning what he needed to write. And he didn't write as much as everybody else necessarily, but he was very, very focused. That's the same point. The extracts are there for a reason. If somebody's spent the time writing it, they really want you to use it. And that's the same point. Use of relevant application. Do not write theoretical answers if it leaves AO2. This is your point. Use of economic concepts. Exactly what you said. It's economics language. And then this one is I mean, we all know that, but timing. And what do we mean by marginal? Have you done marginal product? Have you done that? Do you know what that is? Have you done marginal anything? Have you done marginal revenue? Does the word marginal mean anything? No? Okay. Marginal means extra. So marginal product is the extra output. Have you done utility? Have you done marginal utility? Okay, that means extra satisfaction. So marginal just means extra. If you think about it, if I've got a 4-mark and an 8-mark question, and it's coming up towards the end of the exam, if I spend all my time on this one, I might get 4 out of 4. Might not, but I might get 4 out of 4. All I've got to do is start this one, and I'm going to accumulate a lot of early marks very quickly. So running out of time and never getting to that question is madness, because you can pick up you'll pick up the knowledge marks here really quickly, okay? And it would be better sacrificing a little bit of, I mean, to get 8 out of 8 is really tough. So let's say I've got 2 8-mark questions, 8 and 8. To get full marks on that one is really, really tough. To get the lower level marks here is much easier. So if I'm short of time, leave that one, even if it's unfinished, and get onto that one, and you'll accumulate marks much faster. So the only question I ask students when they come out of an exam is, I don't want their assessment of how they think they've done, because they often are not, you know, they'll convince themselves it's that or that. I just want to know, did you finish? Because if you finish, then you've probably picked up the lower marks on every question. I hope you've got the higher marks as well, but you're probably okay. If you didn't finish, you probably left some kind of low-hanging fruit here that you could have got marks really quickly. So again, I know it's obvious, but you need to be absolutely clear. How long is exam? Well, I'm asking you, I don't know the answer for CA. How long is paper 1? Right, I'm sure you do know. That's what you need to know. How many minutes do I have for paper 1? That's what you need to know. Can you sit here and tell me paper 1 is section A, section? Can you describe that paper so that you know that by, I'm making this up, you know, if I start at 9, by 10 o'clock I should be at this part on the paper. You should plan that in advance. You should be absolutely focused in advance that when you walk into that room, this is what the paper's going to look like. And it will look similar. I've told you we're going to make sure that the structure's the same, and that by 9:30 or whatever it is, I am about here. And you're monitoring your own time. Some students, I'm sure you do, some students go in and the first thing they do is they put the timings down on the paper. And they're monitoring their own timing to make sure they get through. And if I have to abandon this one, this 8-marker, because I haven't quite finished, I've probably still got hopefully 5 or 6. To get those last 2 marks, I could spend the rest of my life and maybe not get them. Move on, get on to the next one. Make sure that you power through a bit. Okay, let's have a go at some of these. Okay, now this again may vary from board to board, so I'm going to give you some guidance and you can tell me if that isn't right for me. What are we trying to do for that, do you think? Do we know that phrase? Have you come across normal goods? Does that mean anything? No? Okay, don't worry, that's all right. It's all right. Have you come across normal goods? No, okay, so you have. Do you know what a normal good is? No, okay. What happens to demand when income goes up? So imagine you get more income. What happens to demand for cars? What would you think happens? Right, if you get more income, if we all start earning more, yeah? What would you think happens? They'll go up. And that's a normal good. Normally, if you get more income, you buy more. Simple as that. There are some things where if you get more income, you might buy less. So imagine these are a very cheap brand of food. You get more income, you might decide, well, I can afford that now. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go to that restaurant. You might say, well, I always used to go there on holiday because it was cheap. Now I've got more income, I can afford to go there. So you'll find some products with more income, demand goes down. And those are called inferior products. So in economics, we've got normal goods and we've got inferior goods. And it's just to do with income. So, okay, so don't worry about that. But the point being, what's that question asking me to do? Yeah. Just define it. Very fast. It's 2 marks. You should be spending about 2 minutes max, 1 minute on this. Okay? You don't need to rewrite the question. You just go and define it. Very, very quick. Again, Pearson would say, we've asked you to define it. We haven't asked you to give examples. So don't give us examples. CIE might be different. You will know, not me. But you just got to understand the rules of that examiner. Do they like examples or not for that question? Here, this particular board, I suspect it's the same. Every examiner report says, don't want examples, don't worry, just want a definition. So you could spend a lot of time, wasted time doing things you don't need. So what is meant is simply 2 parts, and you would simply say, you know, as income increases, demand goes up. You've got 2 parts to your answer. Okay, you're telling me you haven't done price elasticity of supply, is that right? Yeah? Okay. So I mean, the question tells you there. Tell me two things, if you were given that question, two things you need to do to make sure you get the 2 marks. Write down the formula, yeah, because that would do that. If you write down the formula, you're going to get a mark. We're going to reward something you know. And then the other thing you're going to do, second, calculate it. And in this one, again, this is Pearson. It may be the same for you, 2 decimal places. So you've just got to round it up or down or whatever for that second mark. Okay, so general thing for any exam board, calculation, correct units, and the rest we won't go through that. Okay. Tell me about that one. What would you do? Have you done supply curves? You haven't done supply curves either? No? Okay. Supply curves? Have you done supply curves? Have you done supply curve? Done supply curve? Okay. Who wants to tell me about supply curves? What does that thing show me? Anybody? Yeah, go on, yeah?
The relationship between quantity supplied and the price.
Yeah. Okay. And what's it showing me on that?
If the price increases, the quantity increases.
Yeah. And you could read off some numbers, isn't it? So this is telling me how much producers are able to produce and want to produce at each price, given the conditions we're in at the moment. So given the supply conditions we've got, it's showing me a price and quantity relationship. So what's one effect of a change in price? What happens if the price changes? What would you tell me for that?
If the price increases, the quantity supplied by the producer.
Yeah, okay. Why have they given me a diagram then? So I could just say, if the price goes up, the quantity supplied increases. Okay, that's knowledge. But they give me a diagram. So what should I probably do? Yeah, or certainly use the diagram. So again, somebody sat there and decided they want to produce a diagram for me. They could have just asked me that question generally, but it's not the supply curve of anything. It's the supply curve of wheat, and that's the supply of wheat. So if I ignore that diagram, I'm probably going to upset an examiner who spent months and months drawing it. You see what I mean? It's not, we've got a context here, and the context is this. So I would imagine to answer that, I'm going to try and relate it to that, which I can do really simply. How can I use that? How could you use that diagram?
Price increase from 4.5, quantity increase from 150 to 200. Okay.
Seems to have used the diagram. Yeah, seems to have used the context. So now I could get AO2. I mean, I would check the mark scheme, and the mark scheme would say, is this AO1 or is this AO1 and AO2? If it's AO2, it's all about context. And my suspect for that question, if I've drawn that, I'd expect that. And again, the danger is you walk out the exam and you go, oh, well, I know supply curve. Price goes up, quantity supply goes up. I've done brilliantly. Yeah, but you didn't relate it to those numbers. Okay. What about, let's have a look at that one. Have a look at that G question, see if that makes any sense to you. Has anybody done supply and demands? Anybody want to know? So you're going to get, obviously, whichever board you're doing, again, you're going to get a lot of supply and demand stuff. And using diagrams is again, something you need to understand what your board looks for when using diagrams. Anybody want to have a go at that? Anyone want to explain that? What's this P and Q? What's going on there? Does anyone know what that is? You okay? Got any ideas? Any thoughts? No? Any ideas? Yeah. Okay, because? Right, so again, we've got a diagram. In this case, they're going to make us use it because they're saying redraw it. So they're going to make us use the context. And what we've got here is the market for apples, supply and demand, and we've got equilibrium at this point. Okay, that's where the quantity supplied and demand is equal. What's going on here is there's a decrease in the price of bananas. This is apples, but the price of bananas has gone down. What do you think people are going to do if bananas are cheaper? Here's apples and here's bananas, and bananas become cheaper. What do you think customers might do? What do you think they're going to do? Yeah? They're going to go and buy bananas, maybe. So if they're going to go and buy bananas, they're switching away from apples to bananas because they're cheaper. So when we look at the world of apples, what we're going to find is that demand for apples is going to fall. It's going to shift because we want that, not this anymore. So what did you want me to do on this diagram? You're right, absolutely right. Go on. Yeah. So there's supply, there's demand, this is the price, this is apples, this is quantity, PQ, that's where we were, yeah? And you want me to draw another you want me to shift the demand for apples this way, is that right? Okay. Is that the way I've just done it there? Is that how you would draw the diagram? Is there anything you would add or take away? Is there anything about that diagram? Sorry, this will be there, obviously. Yeah? You want to put a new equilibrium on? You want me to do that? Yeah?
Arrows.
You want me to put some arrows on? Yeah? Anything else you want me to do? Is that all right? That's okay. Well, I passed. Well, okay, thank you. So, economics, you're going to draw lots and lots of diagrams. Check again from the mark scheme what it is they look for. So I could do this, I could do, what am I doing? I could do this, I could do this. But I need to know what exactly, I mean, how many marks have we got there? We've got 3 marks. What are those 3 marks given for? Because I've done this, I've shifted this line, I've relabeled this, I've put an arrow there, I've relabeled this, I've put an arrow there, I've put an arrow there. Do I need to do all of that to get 3 marks? Mark scheme will tell me. What if I did that? So I've shifted it, I've labelled it, I've got an arrow, well, I haven't got that, I've got those things. Is that 3 marks? So I need to be clear in my head what examiners want. And again, I'm only, I'll use Pearson as an example, but if you check the CI, Pearson like exactly what you said, this to be labelled. They want that labelled, the new equilibrium. They are not interested actually in arrows. Lots of other boards might be, but that or my things here, not so interested in that. Very interested in that, okay? And the labelling here. So again, getting an understanding of how to draw the diagrams accurately is simple marks. Okay, let's have a look at that. Diagram needs accurate labels and arrows, sorry, no, not arrows. The equilibrium here is what they want to get to the new thing. Okay. Labelled, labelled, labelled. Okay, what about that one? Tell me about that one. What? Again, we're just thinking, that you may or may not have studied the context, but we're just thinking about the nature of the skills that we've got to use there. Does anyone know what that question, can anyone explain that question to me? Anybody? No? What about, I mean, don't worry about detail then. So what about that? What does that, why is that important? Application. You know, again, some boards will make it absolutely clear, some may not even say that. But what it's saying is, if you don't use that, when we look at the mark scheme, you're not going to get context, it's going to limit marks. So this answer must do that. And your knowledge of economics, that's where your concepts come in. Do you need to draw a diagram for that? Don't need to, but often in economics, using the diagram will explain. So in something like externalities, if you've studied it, diagram's often a quick way of showing things, but you don't need to. And then what does this mean? Do I need to look at the argument for and against? You're saying no, because? No. So it's not a discuss, it's not an evaluate. So I'm not going to spend time all over here. I'm just going to do some of this stuff in the context of plastic bottles. Yeah? Okay. So one-sided argument evaluation is not needed. Okay, don't need that one. Okay, well, okay. We can probably do that. State one disadvantage to firms of increased competition. Tell me about that one. What do we think about that as an answer? What do you think? Okay, not okay?
Too much analysis is too stated.
Great, exactly. Which is fine, but it's doing this, it's beginning to do this, which actually for 1 mark is working too hard. I mean, you know, fine, but you're wasting time. I mean, that, again, depends on your board, but a state 1 for 1, like that's not, it's not worth, you know, get that mark and just move on. Don't write an essay on it. And you're absolutely right, that's. Now, I don't teach Pearson, so I'm not doing this because I've got any interest in it whatsoever particularly, but if you do want, what's good about their mark schemes is they give sample answers. Does CIE do that as well? Do you get sample answers? So although it's a different board and you'd have to be careful with that, what's good is they give a commentary on why they gave marks for things, and it's just quite interesting. That's why I did it for you today. You know, what they're saying here is, well, you give them 3 things. You could actually, kind of, in theory, get 3 marks, but there's only 1 mark available. Main point is don't waste time. We won't do that one, you know that one. Okay, long load of text, so just read the question and tell me what is your brain telling you about answering that question. So don't read the text. What's your brain telling you about that? What would you think about? I don't need the content, but how are you going to structure this answer?
About like why skills and qualification would increase supply and why then other factors and what should be considered.
Yeah. Okay. What again is the importance of this? Context. And I suspect from memory, I don't necessarily say that, but you've still got to go back to the text. This is about that item. Assess. Assess is a big word. So assess is an AO4. Evaluate, discuss, assess are AO4s. So what you need to make sure here is, yes, it will. No, it won't. And then what's the really key bit if you can get it? Yes, it will. No, it won't. What's the final thing you're looking for? Yeah? Conclusion. Overall, is it, maybe it will in the short term, but not the long term. Maybe it will if. Maybe it won't because. But what's your actual judgment at the end? Quite tough to do. So here, for example, this we won't go through this, but I can send you the copy of this. But we've got a student saying why they are using a diagram, which they don't have to do, but it's often a good. I mean, the minute you start doing that, you're showing you do know economics and you can use diagrams, and it's nicely labelled. And this is analysing using economic concepts. So that's your point about bringing in concepts. Supply and demand is the key to so much. If you can just shift a few lines around, you're beginning to illustrate principles. So they've got an argument for, they've got however. So you know, your classic here is yes, however, and you're into the counter argument. And then the really powerful stuff is they've got a conclusion. So they go yeah, they go however, and then they try and wrap it up and say, well, actually, this is what's likely to happen. And that is a heavy brain power. You've got to do a lot to reach a judgment, and that's what will kind of take you to the top level. So they got 9 marks. So I'll just, again, this is just to illustrate the point. I'm not expecting you to read all this, but this is a Pearson one. You can do exactly the same for CIE. This tells me, what does that tell me actually for Pearson? What does that tell me about that question? Just focus on that bit, because that's actually quite interesting here. You're now brilliant examiners. You can come and work for me. What does that tell me about that question? So that question is worth 9 marks. What are those 9 marks for? Just look at this bit. What are those 9 marks for? What's that? What's AO2? Right. You've got to have 3 marks of context. This was all the one about teachers in the UK. If I don't have that, I can't have 3 marks. AO3? 3 marks for that. AO4? Evaluation, judgment, 3 marks. This is Pearson, check for CIE. What are the no, on that type of question for Pearson, what are the no marks for? Knowledge. On these big questions, that if you actually know a lot, but that's all you can do, you would get 0. Because the way they've allocated their marks is you've got to do something with it. And that's tough again. You're reading an answer saying, well, they know a lot about supply and they know a lot about demand or whatever it is. It's only knowledge. And for that question, 0 marks. Now check again for your board, what's the allocation? Because you could be wasting an awful, I mean, obviously you need knowledge to access this, but you're not going to get credited for the knowledge. So, you know, some students spend a lot of time defining things at the beginning. I'm going to define this word and define this word, and I'm going to show them all the knowledge that I know. Well, actually, for this one, blimey, get stuck into the answer, because you need to get on with it for this. You're not going to get knowledge. This is the Pearson approach again. This may be, you know, the CIE, I'm sure, is similar. This is a levels approach. And what they're describing is the type of skill that you need to get the different marks. So if I want the top mark, information, excellent selectivity, application of things, and more than one viewpoint, well balanced, leading to an understanding, coherent judgment. Okay, so that's what I need to do for the 9. For the 9, I've got a context, I've got to do that, and I've got to reach that and come to that judgment. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm down here, it's because maybe I've only done one side of the argument. Or maybe I haven't analysed very well, or I'm not applying. If I read an answer that's not applying, then I'm going to be keeping it down here. Okay? What we use in this thing is called best fit. So imagine that you analysed very well, and you tried to make a judgment. So some of the things you're doing are kind of around here, but you didn't apply at all. Then best fit is going to pull you way down. You're going to have to go down because you haven't done everything that's required for that. You might have done some of this, but if you haven't done it all, you go down in the thing. So again, when I was talking about mark schemes, by all means read this, but you're probably not going to get a question about that particular context again. So kind of spending hours on thinking about teacher training in the UK is all very interesting, but you're probably not going to get asked it again. Much more interesting to get familiar with this. If you get familiar with the way the mark scheme is applied, you've got something that can be used for any question at all. And in terms of kind of working with teachers and things, you know, making sure you're clear, what does this mean as opposed to, can you articulate, this is what we do with examiners, it's a really good, and teacher training as well, it's a very good exercise to say, what is that question, what does it really mean? And what's the difference between level 3, level 2, level 1? Can you explain it? Now, if you can get to the stage when you can explain a question, well, level 3 is going to have context. I'm going to argue for, I'm going to argue against, I'm going to probably talk about these sorts of things, and then I'm going to make a judgment based on this. You know what a great answer looks like. Then you can go and write it. Okay, so I'm probably going to finish on that. But so things we probably know already, but just to keep reminding ourselves. Knowledge is important to access questions, but it is not the end, you know, it's not the, well, they're not the key thing. It's not going to get us right to the top. Knowledge is a gateway. To answer some of these questions, the way into the question is you can't answer an interest rate question if you haven't studied it. Understand that? You need the knowledge. But you've got to really go, okay, now what do I do with it? That, and we seem pretty good on that, but what do I do for an analyse compared to discuss? A lot of people, if you ask them to analyse, end up discussing, or if you ask them to discuss, end up just analysing, and it's getting that structure right. That, pretty straightforward, but worth practicing. Why drop simple marks because you've got the units wrong? And then that one again is just obvious that why drop marks that you could pick up really quickly on an 8. I mean, if you wrote a paragraph on an 8 marker, you're probably going to pick up some marks fast. So don't just leave them whatever, and don't be a perfectionist. Don't you know, when we set these grades, you know, a 9 is not 100%. You don't need 100% to get a 9. What you need to do for most of these is you need to perform pretty well on most questions and you'll get a really high grade. It's about, when we're asked to describe performance, high-level performance is about consistency, being really consistent across the paper, rather than, that's one amazing answer. I should have given that 20 marks out of 8, but they didn't finish the rest of it. That's bonkers. You're better getting 6 out of 8 and 6 across than 20 out of 8, which you can't have, and then lots of some zeros. I think that's probably all. Okay, that's probably me done. Is there any questions you have? So tell me the 3 things, the documents we're going to have next in our room on our desk. Probably 4, I don't know. What are we going to have on our desk? What are you going to have? One document, anybody going to have? Examiner report, we're going to read a few of them, okay? And once you've read 4 of them, you'll see the same themes coming through every time. Very straightforward. So I'd read them, yep, summarise that, yep. Give me another one. Past papers. Whenever we've got a past paper, we must have mark scheme, because no point looking at paper, look at the mark scheme. In the mark scheme, what's the key bit in the mark scheme? What's the key bit? This side or this side? What's the key bit? That side. So if all you do is look at that, you're not learning how they apply the mark scheme. That's more important. If you can understand that, again, same with examiners. If you can understand that, you can mark any 9-mark question, because all you're doing is applying a way of thinking, whatever the question is. Understanding that is more important than understanding the teaching profession in the UK, wonderful though it is. We need the mark scheme. So we've got examiner reports, we've got mark scheme, what else have we got? Anything else? Syllabus. Okay, and why have we got the syllabus? And the only questions they can ask are in that syllabus. And therefore, that's your reference point. Not the textbook, although it's probably right. Not your notes, although they're probably right. Not a website, although it's probably right. Syllabus, because that's what they have in front of them. And I think, yeah, just make sure you've got the latest version of it, because they sometimes update it and change a few things. Okay, so go off and do brilliant things. Do study hard, which is what you said, but study in a very focused way in terms of the skills. All right? We're done, thank you. Right, thank you for your time.